So another kind of theme I think that you're going to get today is hybrid cloud makes for some strange bedfellows in that because we are straddling different clouds, straddling different kinds of technologies, you're going to have folks that have different perspectives that need to be straddled, that need to cooperate, that need to interoperate. And I think of those strange bedfellows, perhaps none is more surprising than the VMware AWS relationship. I've been in cloud computing for many years. For many years, VMware was a mortal enemy of AWS. And all of a sudden you wake up one morning and VMware and AWS are great friends, and VMware can't wait. And I think what VMware realized was that actually trying to fight AWS really does not make sense. And VMware wanted to really collaborate with AWS to find the right tool for the job, the right solution for the job. And so Jin Zhang from AWS is spearheading that effort, and take it away on hybrid cloud, AWS, and VMware.
Thank you so much, Brian. So really appreciate everybody coming out, and sort of, what I'm here for really is a brainstorming session on hybrid cloud. As many of you just heard from Alex earlier on, right? It's a pretty hairy problem, isn't it? A list of challenges and all that, right? And for that reason, we've been, as you guys know, in AWS, we're pretty obsessed about what customer problem do we have and how can we go solve it in a very cool way. And it's the kind of the collaborations we have with customers like PitchBook, like Alex, and later on this afternoon, I think you guys will hear from T-Mobile. These are the type of the customers and the learning we'd love to harvest, and that's really why we're sort of increasing our effort, our investment. We got a team, and we continue to grow that team to look into that space. And that's, feel free to check out our booth downstairs throughout the day. Get in touch with some of my AWS colleagues there. Find out about all the exciting things we're doing, and certainly all the exciting opportunities. But what I'm trying to do today is briefly set the stage about why we want to look for, what is hybrid cloud is really about, and what why we're here looking for some of easier target as starting points, right? Get over some of the challenges, look for the quicker ROIs. But then, if I can possibly manage to have some time left, I'd love to get input from the crowd here too, is, just like what Alex had shared earlier, what worked for you? And, what are things you suggest the group here not to go into, right? Sort of as an important way for us to go through this journey together. So first and foremost, I have to admit, the definition of hybrid cloud can take on many, many forms, right? I see some smile in the audience. So I'd like to get engaged here with our group. Can you please just shout out when we talk about hybrid cloud, or when you made the decision to come into this room, with all the options that's available out there, what were you thinking about? What does hybrid cloud mean for you in your mind? And because we're recording, so I'd say shout out loud. And later on when you do Q&A, I encourage you to use the mic. What do you think hybrid cloud means here? Anything, just shout out.
Extending my assets from my private environment into the cloud, being able to burst when I need to.
Yeah, being able to burst, cloud burst. That's a classic use case. Thank you. Other thoughts? Sir, do you have a definition there?
To me, it's having your iron in your own data center and commingling of that with the cloud resources.
Thank you. You talked about commingling. You kind of want both, and you need both there, right? For whatever the reason you need. Was there another thought? Yes, please.
Disaster recovery.
Disaster recovery, excellent, right? We know trying to keep a data center warm or hot or on standby can be fairly expensive, and we don't know how often do we get to utilize it. And we're looking for more efficient ways to possibly do disaster recovery. Other thoughts?
Decrease latency.
Decrease latency, thank you. It totally depends on your workload, right? If now you're expanding, let's say, to a international location, possibly sitting in somewhere in the cloud is actually faster than sitting in wherever your data center originally started with. A lot of different scenarios. In fact, just now when I was listening to Alex from PitchBook, I thought about one more definition that I didn't even put on my on my slide, in his mind, he was thinking about going to Rackspace and AWS and kind of go back and forth, isn't it? Research and get into operation. So it's more like a multi-cloud picture, I guess. What I'm trying to say is hybrid cloud has so many different definitions. It's pretty dangerous for us to try to go there, right, without really knowing which one we're tackling. But overall, it proves the point that this is complex and therefore easy to fail. When you have so many mixed definitions, when you have a lot of challenges in dealing with. For example, I list out 3 possibilities where customers would be telling me what they think hybrid cloud means to them. Some of them says, I just got a lot of things. I'm going to stop buying new hardware in my data center for a while. I'm going to migrate things over time. But hybrid cloud is really my strategy for long migration. Some would say, I think this was brought up by the gentleman back there, right? Back and forth between cloud and on-premises, right? Cloud burst as part of that need here. And some of them says, we just need both. Could be some new applications. The tie between these two could be very strong, a lot of interactions per day, or it could be hardly there, across from different business units. But all of these are important because that changes the dynamics when we make product decisions, when we try to figure out what was the best way. Now, associated with these, right, and if I may add the 4th one, which is Alex was talking about, between AWS and Rackspace, in their case there, the list goes on, right? Our intention, however, is not to come to a, single agreed upon definition, because this is reality. We have to embrace this. But it's important to recognize that all these different understanding introduce additional challenges. What are some of the challenges you see in the scenarios of hybrid cloud as we've described so far? Anything pops into your mind? Top of, first word here. Sir, can I have you share a challenge? Yes.
Oh, maybe just an API doesn't match
API.
up correctly.
Yeah, matching up on the APIs. Thank you. What else?
Proximity to users.
Yeah, users, proximity. Very, very key. Thank you. Others?
I think the security piece that you have there is really important, and data privacy.
Yeah.
With GDPR now.
Yep. GDPR, exactly. Like Alex was talking about, he literally has to do this checklist, compliance checklist, and answer, if something disastrous happened, what are you going to do? What was your game plan, right? He needs to have an answer there. That's totally true, adds all that complexity. So because of all these challenges and all that, it gets even more important, again, for hybrid cloud to have some of the starting point to say, what are the projects, what are the workloads that make sense for us to use as a starting point that hopefully give us an easier chance of success? And that's what the session is about, right? I'd like to first show you the vast, difference in variation in definition and the amount of challenges before we go there. And do keep in mind, this is absolutely top of mind, not only for all of you guys here, but probably for a lot of folks out there. I inserted this slide and thinking I would share this with you, right? Many of you were in our keynote session, right, early this morning. This was from the live poll. Now look at it, right? While I was not surprised for serverless, for AI, ML, hybrid cloud to show up because those were track titles and those can influence us as users to say, yeah, that's what I came to this conference for, right? But look at some of the other words that showed up. Migration. Right? A big deal related to hybrid cloud here. Security, the lady was just talking about security here, right? Automation, Alex talked about a lot of those need there for PitchBook. Certainly SaaS, notice Edge is there, right? Because when you talk about hybrid, you inevitably have to talk about one end of that hybrid is possibly the Edge environment. So it is indeed a very tricky problem and therefore adds even more needs to say, how do I get started? How do I get started? So let's get right in. What I intend to do here is, customers like all of us here, have the desire to say, how do I test out hybrid cloud, right? The different ways of dividing and conquer, right? Do we split the service or do we pull them together? Does it make sense? We need to quickly test it out. We need to possibly train some new skills, because if we've moved from an on-premise environment into cloud, we don't necessarily have the skills existing right away, right? And then we have some urgent problems, right? Whether the colo lease is coming up, expiration, that I need to get out of X location in Y number of days, right? And then most importantly, a lot of the business demand is to say, well, we're not sure. We got to do something that quickly proves the ROI before you decide to invest into a 3-year project where your business stakeholders can't really see outcome from it. So with this, I intend to cover 5 possible scenarios. And these are only hints and suggestions as starting points. It's sort of like a cheat sheet, right, for us to go through and say, if I ask these questions and question yes or no will bring me down to a decision tree, and hopefully that will allow me to brainstorm this inside my company to determine the kind of workload that would make sense to be that initial pilot of hybrid cloud and hopefully get me to some early success. That's really the intent. So the next is I'm going to take you through each one of these 5. And I'd like to weave into some of the customer stories I've been told as I was interacting with customers, just to give you some sense. Now, keep in mind, these are only starting points and possible approach to get started, right? May not work for your environment and may have very specific constraint based on the particular situation. And that's really why I want to bring them up here for a discussion. And I would love to hear what worked for you, if you can share with the room here as well. Let's go to the first one, right? Colo lease is coming up. This can be a pretty good hint about trying something for hybrid cloud, as we talked about earlier. And you also heard in Alex's case, right, for Rackspace there, he was using Rackspace as colo there. So you have to be able to decipher this to say, what is the situation for my data center? Is it my own on my own property, my own asset? Is it in a colo location? Is there a lease in place? Right? Is it coming up for renew soon? Is it managed by the provider, or is it managed by me? That makes a huge difference. Remember team structure that Alex emphasized, right? That's a big part. And then, how many applications are on there? How complex are these? How easy are these to be refactored versus how intertwined and interdependent these would be, right? I'll share one example. One of my customers in financial service industry, actually in an adjacency area with where PitchBook was right, as Alex was sharing right before me, right? They were in a colo situation where they needed to get out of their colo lease in 30 days. Now, when you have such a short window, it really limits your options. It limits your options such as how much of a application refactoring you can possibly do, right? How much of a reskilling and shoveling resources you can possibly take on. And what they end up doing is they picked a lift and shift approach that's available to leverage their existing skill set, in this case with VMware, because that's where their on-premises data center was mostly built along for the VMware virtualization technology. And they dropped it into AWS by using VMware Cloud on AWS. And we have a massive amount of migration utility there. Basically allows about 100 VMs to be migrated in a day. They did this in 30 days. Super aggressive, got it done, was able to sign off on the colo and moving forward, right? So in that example here, you'll see there's a lot of limitation about time, about the amount of effort you can possibly spend, and the type of the skill set that you can rally in together in making that happen. Let me come to you, the second scenario. This one is what this gentleman up front was talking about on Cloud Burst. Seasonal and temporary workloads. An event is coming up. Tax season, right? We know things are going to be particularly tight around April timeframe, and then from there we're going to see a big dip. These are kind of candidates for hybrid cloud because you get to leverage these capabilities pay as you go, consume as you need it. But you got to plan ahead and get the time available to have it set up properly so that you don't get yourself off guarded, such as the interdependency back and forth, right? How to get the information back and get the two sets talking. And you also need to think about the duration of these seasonal workload, right? Are we talking about a week, a month, different events, and they come back in a certain cycle? Is it a quarterly thing, right? Is it once a year? And what kind of pattern does that mean? And what would you do with those data? And how would you, what's the expectation for those users that you need to serve? So these are all key considerations. And then also important is to understand the nature of these temporary workloads, right? I have a lot of customers using the cloud burst capability for dev test because that gives their developers a significant amount of freedom, yet not necessarily tied to, day of week, time of day. Whenever you're ready, go for it and bring it back, right? They set up internal process to make sure that's working as efficiently as possible while giving developers the freedom. If that's talking about some production workload, working with your end users, that's a totally different story. You need to think about where they are, what time they're going to access, and how are they geographically distributed so you can make sure you get to serve them the best, right? So that experience there is very different. And then, of course, in this case, you could also see what kind of situation do I have inside my data center, right? If I already have the actual hardware and resources laying around in my data center versus I don't have these already being part of my CapEx purchase, that's a total different story as you make those decisions. So one example I will share here is we've been working with the customer who initially started doing dev test using hybrid cloud, right? They did a lot of the dev test because it was on demand, you charge, you pay as you go, and they don't know how big this is getting in. So they went through some of these. But as they sort through and be able to prove the ROI, being able to show the numbers not only to their internal stakeholders, but to their business partners, right? This is a fairly large public education institution, so they work with a lot of partners in that industry. And they've turned around and said, wow, now we're ready to go into main stage, right? Rolling more and more into production and allow the onboarding of other educational institutions coming in as their partner for that partnership, right? So that has been a pretty successful model. So if you think about it, right, the technology underneath and the business decision really needs to be tightly weaved together based on what is it, who are you serving, and what is it that you're trying to accomplish here. Make it really tight. Moving along a little bit, this next one is I have remote sites. This one is very interesting, and this one is super different from the rest of the four. Why? Because if you think about it, it talks about where it is. Not everything on premises is equal. For example, as we heard this morning from the keynote, some of them have better cloud connectivity than others. Some of them maybe have zero connectivity, right? That presents a totally different challenge. Some of them needs to be physically close to whether it's a processing plant, a pharmaceutical lab, because of low latency or latency sensitive kind of workloads. Some of them, needs to care super big about the network bandwidth, right? In these kind of situations, hybrid cloud come into the picture. You need to think about where the workload is best performed at for the purpose you need to do. And in this case, obviously, then you need to think about, do we do something by bringing the capability to perform the same way onto the edge, the location? And in that case, what about the APIs? What about permission control, right? Using, for example, in AWS, using our IAM. What about compliance requirement? How do I make sure that I can develop one set of application, but deploy to multiple locations and don't have to manage multiple set of code? So this particular remote site topic, and depends on the nature of the remote site, can get very interesting. And that's usually a starting point for you to think about, is this a candidate for hybrid here? The fourth one is geo expansion. We talked about this a little bit, right? We need to grow into certain geo. Is it easier to build data center there? Or is it easy to use a cloud provider who has regional availability there, right? But that also has a high consideration for security, compliance, DevOps, right? What is the best way that helps you to manage the DevOps, to be able to have this seamlessly integrated for your best user experience? And then moving on to the last one, the fourth one, is skill. Did you guys notice one thing as we were talking about the challenges, right? We tend to talk a lot about technology challenges. But I will tell you though, based on what we've learned from the customers, the biggest thing is actually human. Team structure, skill set, right? We do not reskill the entire task force overnight. It doesn't matter whether it's 2.5 people in the DevOps side or 160 operation or 10 times bigger than that. It just doesn't happen overnight. And therefore, in this case, what is really key is to figure out how long have you been operating in cloud? Do you have managed service provider experience, which allows you to do I want to do colo or do I want to do fully managed, right? And then possibly, is your cloud operation team same org or a different organization? How easy it is for you to submit a ticket to make a request to them? And then obviously, this lends to if the skill set is super important to you and you don't think you can retrain over time, this is where lift and shift become a better candidate, right? But in that case, you have to decide, as sort of Alex has gone through for pitch books right before me, is out of all the application and different workloads, which one do I go do lift and shift? Which one do I go do some refactoring? Which one do I possibly take apart and put them into different buckets or possibly different ends of the different platform among the in my hybrid cloud map here? Or possibly what are the ones I combine and roll them into one team? Almost all the combinations here are possible. Right? One example I wanted to share here is, we have a major beverage company where they have invested into, in this case, their VMware technology for years. So they have a very significant investment there, and they have a lot of internally built automation tools tied with their entire system. Right, go all the way end to end as they procure, as they deliver, and as they do follow up with their users. So in this case, those assets is super important to them and important to their competitive edge. And therefore, what they've chosen is they pick what they call the core apps, the core technology there, doing a lift shift, remaining, have this remain with the same virtualization knowledge set, so that they don't have to touch those right away. And instead, once they come to the cloud, they were able to say, let's now expand into additional services that make sense to us. For example, in this case, they looked into, let's go do SageMaker. Let's do DynamoDB because they want to do a little bit more sentiment mining and better serve their users once they come to the cloud, right? So there's a calculation of data volume, how much insight that needs to be generated, and where the insights are going to be consumed at, all that consideration. So far we talked about 5 scenarios, but if we are to sum it up, right? These 5 scenarios are really kind of the starting point, or what I call a cheat sheet, that helps all of us to start thinking. If we are coming to a room to brainstorm to say, where do I get started with hybrid cloud? These are some of the possible starting points for you to say, yes, no, do we have this? Let's go down to the decision tree and start having some of these discussions. And these are the ones I have discovered as most common, most connected with customer scenarios, and tend to help customer to define a very precise proof of concept, know the objective that they hope to achieve, and therefore be able to evaluate easily to say, this can demonstrate ROI versus mission accomplished or not, right? You got to have some clarity along the way. Otherwise, the ambiguity will kill any project, right? Doesn't matter the level of the latitude there. And then just to sum it up though, right? besides, now that we talked about the 5, starting point for cheat sheet, it's important to know that for hybrid cloud, it's totally different for any one of us to have different challenges and even with different definitions. I've gone, to make peace with that, to say it's okay. We're going to learn with our customers and figure out what that means to you and what you need to run your business. But do know there's all kinds of definition and all sorts of challenges out there. With that said, a good rule of thumb, a single one to really move things along, is to prioritize for impact, right? It doesn't matter what the Medium article says. It doesn't matter what Stack Flow has been providing suggestion. Think about what kind of business impact you get to prioritize here. Certainly not one size fit all, but I would still say go grab the low-hanging fruit first, because that builds the confidence inside your organization. It also builds your knowledge and experience on what works and what doesn't, right? If you start small and have a specific deliverable, it's easier for you to triage it to say, is it working for me or not working for me? And most importantly, also know, sometimes trying to plan for a technology strategic decision without thinking skill will bite us later on down the road, right? The skill set is super important, and it actually does not occur from a skill transition perspective inside the organization overnight. So that's really what I've prepared for us today. If I can have the team here share a little bit about, was there a number 6 that you've been dying to shout out and let us know here? What was a good starting point that has brought you some success in trying out hybrid cloud? Or on the flip side, what have you tried that did not work that you suggest us absolutely don't add it to our cheat sheet? Any thoughts that you guys want to share? And certainly, our luxury is from here, we get to huddle a little bit more, either in the room or outside. So make sure, we share that. And personally, I know I would love to hear from you, because as we continue this journey to help our customers in this particular area, right? Question and comments, please use the mic, come forward, because we're doing the recording here, and that will help others later on to get access. You want to come up?
Oh, sure. I may have missed your introduction. Can you just say what do you do at Amazon? What does your team do? Like how do you interact?
Oh, thank you. You're right. We were rushing. So my name is Jin Zhang. Brian helped me to talk about what we're. So I'm a director of product management in AWS. I focus on hybrid computing. This is an area we find a lot of interest, and therefore we're pouring in a lot of investment both in engineering as well as in product management space, right? Talking to customers, and which is really why I want to come to share a few starting points where I've seen customer getting to that success point, and wanted to tell you these and hopefully get you, start thinking and going to as you formulate your strategy and your next step game plan here. Thank you. Other questions, comments? I'll stick around for a little bit and check us out downstairs at the AWS booth. Let us know how we can possibly help you to solve your challenge. Thank you.